Hi, my name's Claire Bennick. For years, I was the invisible sister, the quiet one, the old woman nobody wanted to marry. I built a fortune in silence, and my family built their pride on pretending I didn't exist. At my sister's wedding, she introduced me like a joke, and everyone laughed until her father-in-law looked at me and froze. "Wait, aren't you my new boss?" he said. That's when everything changed. They thought humiliation would keep me small. They didn't realize I was the one holding every piece of their empire. So tell me, what would you do if the family that shamed you lived on the money you gave them? The evening air in Beverly Hills carried that soft, perfumed chill you only get in early spring. I parked at the edge of the Hawthorne estate, right under the shade of their manicured oaks, and just sat there for a moment. From the car, I could already hear the laughter spilling out from the garden. Expensive laughter, the kind that floats with champagne and self-importance. I took a deep breath and fixed the clasp on my navy blue dress. It was simple, classic, and about 10 shades too plain for this kind of crowd. Still, I liked how it made me feel grounded, not desperate to sparkle. Inside, the place looked like something out of a luxury magazine spread. Chandeliers dripping with crystal, waiters gliding around with trays of golden hors d'oeuvres, women in sequins that cost more than my car. I'd been to enough of these events back when I worked in corporate, but tonight, I was here as the invisible sister, the family's quiet footnote. Callista, my older sister, had married into wealth long ago, and she thrived in these circles. I, on the other hand, had learned that silence was safer. As I walked through the crowd, I felt those quick glances, polite, fleeting, but sharp. People didn't know where to place me. Too plain to be one of them, too poised to be the help. I smiled because that's what women like me do when the air gets tight. Smile, keep your hands still, and remember that appearances are a currency here. Callista spotted me across the room and waved, that glossy smile of hers stretching like an actress on a red carpet. She looked perfect, tall, glowing, her hair the exact shade of gold that stylists charge thousands for. She made her way toward me, flanked by her husband's family, a glittering entourage of old money and Botox confidence. "Well, look who decided to show up," she said, kissing the air near my cheek. Her perfume hit like a designer slap. "I was starting to think you'd forgotten how to socialize." "I'm here," I said, keeping my tone light. "Congratulations, by the way. The engagement party looks beautiful." "Of course it does," she replied, laughing a little too loud. "We spared no expense. You should take notes. It's what happens when you plan ahead." I let the jab roll off me. She always needed to score points. I had stopped keeping score years ago. A waiter passed, and she took a glass of champagne for herself before turning to introduce me to her circle. That's when it happened. "This is my little sister, Claire," Callista said, her voice syrupy and loud enough to carry. "The old woman nobody wants to marry, but she's family, so we keep her around." The words sliced clean through the laughter. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. But then came the ripple, that uncomfortable chuckle from people who didn't want to be impolite. One man even raised his glass as if to toast the joke. My body didn't move, but something inside me did. Years of family gatherings, years of being the afterthought, had taught me the art of stillness. I smiled, just as I always did. "Well," I said quietly, "every family needs balance." Callista blinked, unsure if she'd been insulted. She laughed again, but it came out brittle. I let her have the last word because the evening wasn't over, and neither was I. I excused myself, drifting toward the buffet, pretending to study the flowers. The hum of conversation swallowed me again, but I could feel the burn of eyes on my back. My pulse steadied, not from fear, but from clarity. This was why I stayed away. This was why I built my world far from theirs. I reached for a glass of water, my fingers trembling only slightly. Behind me, the music softened, and I heard a man's voice, deep, uncertain. "Wait, excuse me," he said. "Did you say Claire Bennick?" I turned. It was Robert Hawthorne, Callista's father-in-law. His tanned face had gone pale, his glass frozen halfway to his lips. Claire Bennick, he repeated, staring hard. From Bennick Capital? The room went strangely quiet. Callista's smile faltered. Dad, what? But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at me, the way people look when they've seen a ghost. You're my new boss, he said finally, his voice a low mix of shock and disbelief. Gasps fluttered through the group like startled birds. Someone whispered, her? And another whispered, oh my God. I met his gaze and nodded once. I believe we've met, Mr. Hawthorne. The silence stretched. Callista's hand tightened on her champagne flute. Her husband looked between us, confused. I could almost hear her brain spinning. The calculations, the realization that her cruel little joke had just exploded in her face. People began to murmur. Phones lit up. Someone pretended to sip their drink while recording the scene. I didn't give them a show. I simply smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes, and said, if you'll excuse me. I slipped out the side door into the patio garden, the sound of laughter behind me now uneasy, fragmented. Outside, the air was cooler, scented with citrus blossoms. I leaned on the railing and looked out at the glowing lights of the city beyond the hills. My reflection shimmered faintly on the glass door behind me, calm, composed, unreadable. I thought about Callista's words. The old woman nobody wants to marry. I thought about the years I'd spent letting her write the story of who I was, the quiet one, the career woman, the one who didn't fit. And now, one unguarded sentence had flipped the script. It wasn't triumph I felt. Not exactly. More like a quiet settling of the scales. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Inside, I could hear the faint buzz of conversation turning into gossip. The Hawthorns, I knew, would soon piece together that the company acquiring their investments, the very one they'd been courting, was run by me. They would know that the woman their daughter-in-law had mocked publicly was the same woman who signed their contracts. I turned from the view and exhaled. I didn't need to gloat. Let the truth do its work. A waiter stepped outside, startled to find me there alone. Ma'am, would you like another drink? No, thank you, I said, straightening. I think I've had enough for tonight. As I walked toward the valet line, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind me. Someone called my name, but I didn't turn. The night didn't need another scene. In the car, I took one last look at the mansion glowing behind me. The perfect family tableau was cracking, and everyone inside was too polite to admit it. I whispered to myself, they think I'm a secret, but secrets don't stay quiet forever. Then I started the engine, merging into the slow stream of traffic winding down the hill. The city stretched ahead, familiar, relentless, full of unfinished stories. But the worst part wasn't what Callista said. It was what she did next. I didn't sleep much that night. The glow from the Hawthorne estate followed me home like an unwanted souvenir. Even after I showered, changed into flannel pajamas, and sat under a throw blanket with a book I wasn't really reading, the laughter from the gala echoed in my mind. The words Callista said, the ones that made the whole room laugh before they froze, played on loop, broken only by that single look of recognition from Robert Hawthorne. That had been the pivot, the sharp crack in her perfect facade. But what came next, that's what truly stayed with me. The morning after, while I was reheating a cup of yesterday's coffee, a message buzzed on my phone. From Callista's assistant, of course, not Callista herself. She never liked to get her hands dirty. You're cordially invited to a light family brunch at the Hawthorne estate. 11:30 a.m. Informal dress. The text was polite enough, but I could read the subtext from a mile away. This wasn't a brunch. This was damage control. By 11:15, I was parked at the side entrance, the one they usually reserved for vendors and valet overflow. The front was for family. The back was for utility. I chose the back. Callista met me near the side gate with a smile so bright, it felt almost weaponized. Claire, you came. I wasn't sure after last night, you know how things can get, all that champagne and nerves. I offered a smile that didn't quite touch my eyes. Thanks for the invite. Thought I'd see what damage I'd done. She let out a forced laugh and looped her arm through mine like we were sisters from a holiday movie, not two women whose entire relationship was built on decades of subtle warfare. Inside, the brunch was already underway. No more chandeliers or orchestras, just mimosa pitchers, crustless quiches, and curated awkwardness. I could feel it the moment I stepped in. The shift in the way people looked at me. Not like I was invisible this time. No, this time they saw me, but they didn't know how to place me anymore. Some offered polite half-smiles. Others looked away, clearly embarrassed for me, or maybe for themselves. I caught Mr. Hawthorne's eye once. He nodded, stiffly, like a man realizing he owed an apology he wasn't prepared to deliver. That was enough for me. We made it through most of brunch on autopilot. I didn't eat much. The eggs were cold, and the room colder. After dessert, Callista placed her hand gently on my wrist. "Walk with me?" she asked. We stepped out into the side garden, where hydrangeas lined the stone path and the air felt at least 3 degrees cooler. She stopped and faced me, eyes all concern and sisterly sorrow. "Claire, about last night, you know I was joking, right? It was a silly moment. Everyone was just..." I cut her off with a look. Not a word. Just a look. She paused, swallowed something she didn't say, then continued. "Anyway, I hope you didn't take it too seriously. I mean, we all have our roles in the family." "Our roles," I repeated quietly. She nodded. "Exactly. Like, I'm the one who makes the connections. You're the smart, quiet one." Before I could respond, she reached into her clutch, probably to pull out lip balm or another excuse, and the entire thing slipped from her hands, spilling its contents onto the path. Reflex kicked in. I knelt to help her gather her things. Tissues. Lipstick. A folded cocktail napkin with someone's phone number on it. And then, a document. Thick, folded once. I unfolded it without thinking. My name. Claire Bennick. In bold. A loan application. With my information. My address. My social security number. A signature. Mine, but not mine. A signature she had clearly traced from an old birthday card or some tax form I didn't remember giving her access to. I looked up at her. She was frozen, mouth parted just slightly. "That's not Claire, that's..." I handed it back without a word, straightened up, dusted my palms on my slacks. "Careful, Callista," I said, meeting her eyes. "Not everything you drop can be picked back up." I walked back inside alone. A few minutes later, they brought out chairs for a group family photo. Assigned seating, of course. Just like everything else around here, curated. Controlled. I found my seat. A neatly printed card rested on the chair cushion. It read, "Mrs. Turnip." I stared at it for a long moment. Someone, some assistant perhaps, had either made a typo or a joke. Either way, it landed with a soft, acidic chuckle from the guests who noticed. Callista's voice rang out a little too brightly. "Oh no, that's hilarious. What a silly mistake. We'll get it fixed." She didn't move to fix it. No one did. So I sat, right there, in the chair marked for someone else, with the wrong name and the wrong intention. My back straight, my head high, letting the paper stay right where it was. When they can't insult you outright, I thought, they find smaller, meaner ways. The photo was taken. I smiled. Not for them, but for myself. Because I knew. Later that day, after I returned home, I changed into jeans and a sweater, made myself a cup of tea, sat at my desk, turned on the lamp, and opened a fresh folder on my laptop. I named it Control and Contingency. Inside, I began building. Names. Dates. Entities. The bank she borrowed from. The foundations she claimed to build. The paper she left behind when she thought no one was watching. The parts of my identity she'd sliced into little, convenient pieces to decorate her perfect narrative. This wasn't just about family anymore. It wasn't about being seen, or heard, or remembered in a photograph. This was theft. This was fraud. This was financial warfare, and I was going to win. The week passed slowly, though I kept myself busier than usual. I told myself it was just work, but deep down I knew what I was doing. keeping my mind from circling back to Callista, the loan document, and the look she gave me when I handed it back. Every time I replayed that moment, something colder settled inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. By Friday, I was back home in Napa Valley. The drive up from Los Angeles was long, a blur of empty freeway and blooming vineyards. Normally, I loved this drive. It had always felt like crossing a border into peace. But this time, the silence pressed against me instead of soothing me. Even the gentle hum of the wind through the grapevines seemed to echo with her laughter from that brunch. My house sat on a quiet hill, tucked between a cluster of olive trees and a stretch of vines that I leased to a local grower. I'd built it after my father passed, part retreat, part reminder of everything I'd built without applause. When I walked in, the air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee grounds. I dropped my bag by the door and paused, letting the stillness sink in. You'd think peace would be comforting, but sometimes silence feels like a mirror showing you things you've avoided seeing. I boiled water for tea, trying to fill the house with some small sound. I sat at my desk, the same one that had belonged to my father. The oak was worn smooth by his hands, a reminder of the man who never said much but always seemed to know what mattered. The top drawer was stiff when I pulled it open. It hadn't been touched in years. Inside were old blueprints, pens that had run dry, and an envelope. My name was written across it in his unmistakable handwriting. For a moment, I just stared at it. My father wasn't sentimental. He didn't leave notes. He believed in showing, not telling. The sight of that envelope made my throat tighten. I picked it up carefully, like it might crumble if I breathed too hard, and unfolded the single page inside. Claire, it began, the ink slightly faded but steady. The world will try to convince you that silence is weakness. But you've always understood that silence is strength. You are the daughter I built this legacy for, the one who never needed applause to build empires. My vision blurred halfway through the line. I wasn't crying out of sadness. It was something else, recognition maybe. He had seen me. He had always seen me, even when no one else did. I pressed the paper flat against the desk, tracing the curve of his letters. For years, I had been the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who didn't demand space or attention. Callista was the opposite. Loud, dazzling, the family's golden ticket. My mother once said she sparkled like champagne. What she didn't say was that champagne eventually goes flat. I spent the afternoon moving through the house, touching old things as if they could speak back to me. His books. The watch he left on the mantel. The faint grease stain on the garage wall from the years he spent tinkering with machines. By evening, the sun had dipped low over the hills. The golden light turned the fields outside into ribbons of fire. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct told me to answer. Claire? It was my mother. Her voice still carried that thin, careful politeness she used whenever she felt guilty. I was wondering if you might join me for lunch tomorrow. Just us. I hesitated. We hadn't had a real conversation in months. The last time we spoke, she'd asked if I was dating anyone, and then sighed when I said no. Still, there was something in her tone that sounded heavy. Sure, I said finally. 1 o'clock. Perfect. There's a little restaurant in St. Helena I think you'll like. We hung up. I stared at my reflection in the window, the sunset pooling behind me. My face looked tired, older than I remembered. But the expression staring back wasn't defeated. It was focused. The next day, I arrived early. The restaurant was quiet, full of couples and retirees. My mother walked in 15 minutes late, wearing pearls and a cardigan too formal for the place. She greeted me with that faint smile, habitual, not affectionate. You look well, she said, sliding into the seat opposite mine. So do you, I replied. How's Callista? A flicker crossed her face. Busy, I suppose. She's always been ambitious. That's one word for it. She stirred her iced tea, the clinking of the spoon filling the space between us. I know things between you two are strained, she said finally. I never meant for it to be that way. I stayed quiet. She continued, eyes fixed on the glass. Your sister always needed more. Even as a child. More attention, more praise, more everything. She couldn't stand to be second. I thought if I gave her what she wanted, she'd calm down. She didn't, I said simply. No, my mother admitted, her voice small. But you were always strong, Claire. You didn't need it the way she did. You were self-sufficient. There it was, the justification. Not an apology. Just logic wrapped in regret. Needing more doesn't justify taking everything, I said, my tone calm but final. She looked up at me then, truly looked, maybe for the first time in years. But she said nothing. The silence between us stretched. When the check came, she reached for it out of habit. I let her. Some debts aren't financial. The drive home was quiet, except for the hum of the tires. The vineyards blurred by like a film I'd already seen too many times. That night, I sat by my window with my father's letter on my lap. Outside, the moonlight washed over the vines, silvering the leaves. The world looked peaceful again, but it didn't feel the same. Something in me had shifted. I thought about who I used to be, the younger sister who kept her head down, who thought staying quiet meant staying safe. And I thought about the woman I was now, the one who'd built a life large enough for others to steal from. They wanted me invisible because it was easier to control a shadow. But they'd made me visible now, and I wasn't going to fade again. If they wanted a family trust, I'd show them what that really meant. By Monday morning, the invitation came, typed, formal, and irritatingly polite. Not from Callista, of course. Her name was on the top of the email, but it had clearly been drafted and sent by her assistant, some young woman probably just out of college, with a fancy email signature and no clue what she was caught up in. Subject line: Family Legacy Planning Dinner, Private Event. The body of the message was brief, almost sterile. You are cordially invited to a private family dinner to discuss the formation of the Vexley Family Trust. Your experience and financial insight are highly valued. Thursday, 7 p.m. Vexley Estate. Dress code: business casual. That phrase, your experience and financial insight are highly valued, was almost impressive in its manipulation. Not your contribution. Not your position as our financial backbone. No, just a vague nod to my insight, as though I were a consultant they could hire and dismiss as needed. I stared at the screen for a few minutes.
I didn't respond.
I didn't need to. I already knew I'd be there. Thursday evening came quickly. I arrived at the Vexley Estate 15 minutes early, not to be eager, but to observe. Old habits. The driveway was lined with polished cars, the kind you don't drive yourself. I was shown inside by a young man in a too-tight blazer who didn't recognize me, which I appreciated. The fewer smiles I had to return, the better. The dining room had been converted into what could only be described as a legacy lounge. Soft lighting, printed materials, a whiteboard with a mocked-up family crest, and name cards arranged like a corporate retreat. I took my seat without comment. Callisto arrived late, as always, glowing in designer silk. Her husband trailed behind her, looking vaguely confused and entirely unnecessary. After greetings and light conversation that felt more like performance art than family gathering, Robert Hawthorne cleared his throat and stood near the head of the table. "We've been thinking," he began, "about the future, not just for our children, but for the Vexley legacy as a whole. And we believe it's time to formalize our family's financial vision." He gestured to the folders in front of each of us. I flipped mine open. Terms, structures, estimated contributions. My name was listed 3 times, once as potential majority contributor, twice under advisory oversight. "Claire," he said, turning toward me, "given your considerable success, we'd love for you to play a significant role in shaping the trust." Callista chimed in, perfectly rehearsed. "Of course, you'd retain a seat on the board. A full 30% voting share." I scanned the page again. 80% of the assets would come from me. I'd be allowed 30% of the voice. "And who," I asked, "determines which causes are worthy of the trust's support?" Callista didn't even hesitate. "The founding board, of course." She smiled. "Too fast. Too wide." "Which currently includes," I let the sentence hang. She cleared her throat. Myself, Robert, and James. But we're happy to expand that in time. I nodded. Of course. They mistook my calm for compliance. They always had. Dinner followed, filled with strategic compliments and lukewarm conversation. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. My silence had begun to make them nervous. That was the first win. After dessert, people dispersed into smaller circles. I stepped out to the garden for air. It was late now, nearly 9:30. The sky had gone dark, but the lawn glowed under soft lanterns. That's where I found Lily, Callista's daughter, chasing a frog along the hedge. She was 11, bright, unfiltered, and still too young to know when to keep secrets. Hey, and Claire, she said, grinning up at me. Mom said you're helping her with a new fund. I raised an eyebrow. Did she? Yeah, Lily nodded. She said you're, like, the best behind-the-scenes person ever, and that you don't mind not getting credit as long as the family looks good. I didn't answer right away, just smiled and crouched beside her. You know, I said gently, being behind the scenes means you get to see how everything really works. Lily shrugged, distracted by the frog again. Mom says it's better that way, that some people are just meant to support others. Some people say a lot of things, I said, standing. Later that night, back home in my study, I pulled up the folder I'd started. Control and contingency. The documents were already organized. I'd added names, figures, scanned screenshots. I opened a new section titled Misrepresentation of Ownership. Then I called Elgin. He picked up on the second ring. Evening, Claire. I need you to start looking into something, I said. Quietly. The Vexley Family Trust. I want to know how it's structured, who's attached, and whether they've used my name to secure any pre-funding. Elgin exhaled slowly. Understood. Elgin, I added. They're trying to build a castle. I want to make sure I own the land it's sitting on. A pause. Then his voice measured. We'll start digging. I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and walked out onto the patio. The vines outside rustled in the wind, but I barely heard them. My thoughts were a series of chess moves. They thought I'd let them draw the blueprint, but I'd already laid the foundation, deep, legal, and waiting. Let them build their castle. I was already digging beneath the foundation. By the following Tuesday, I had spent 3 full days combing through emails, spreadsheets, and past contracts, half looking for answers, half confirming what I already knew in my gut. The trust dinner had left me with more than a bitter taste. It left evidence. I wasn't working alone, of course. Elgin and I had a quiet rhythm when it came to information gathering. I'd send notes late at night, short phrases, flagged files, screenshots. He'd follow up in the morning, always polite, never surprised, as though nothing shocked him anymore. But on Wednesday afternoon, I received something I hadn't expected. It was a short email from someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Cynthia Monroe. We'd worked together briefly when I was still building out my portfolio, back before any of my investments made headlines. She had a sharp mind and a soft voice, the kind of person who never raised her tone but could silence a room with 5 words. The subject line read, "Saw you." Inside the email, just one sentence. Caught a glimpse of you at the Hawthorne event last week. Couldn't believe the silence. You built this company. You deserve more. I reread it 3 times. Not because I needed the praise, but because it came without strings. No ask, no angle, no subtext. Just truth, quietly delivered. It landed somewhere deep inside me. All these years I'd kept quiet, deliberately removed myself from the noise, the spotlight, the look what I've done announcements that people like Callista lived for. I never cared to be center stage. But there was something about being seen, recognized without fanfare, that hit different. The world remembered before I had to remind it. That was rare. That was power. 2 days later, I drove down to Elgin's office in downtown Los Angeles. The air was hot and dry, the kind of weather that made your skin feel tight and your patience shorter. I parked a few blocks away to clear my head before the meeting. His office was in a high-rise that hadn't been updated since the early 2000s, but the furniture was clean and the coffee was always strong. Elgin greeted me in the hallway. "Claire," he said, nodding. "Got something you need to see." We sat in his glass-walled office, the blinds half drawn. He pulled up a folder on his laptop and rotated the screen toward me. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "3 loans," he replied, "taken out in the past 12 months. All under your name. Or rather, a version of your name. Same address, same last 4 of your social. But the signatures," he clicked, enlarged the boxes. I stared. The handwriting was close enough that someone might not question it. But I could see the difference. Callista had always looped her R's too high. "She used my identity?" "She used your portfolio as well," Elgin added, tapping through documents. "Cross-referenced with bank records. She listed your holdings as collateral, falsely verified." "That's not just misuse," I said quietly. "That's premeditated." He nodded. Callista didn't want to share the spotlight. She wanted to take the stage and cut the lights on you entirely. I leaned back in my chair, letting that truth settle. It wasn't just the name calling at the gala. It wasn't the fake smiles or the seat with the wrong name card. This was deliberate financial theft, an attempt to rewrite the narrative so that I was no longer just in the background. I was out of the frame entirely. I turned back toward Elgin. "How do you want to proceed?" "We document. We track patterns. We build the case quietly." "But Claire," he paused. "You'll have to confront her eventually." I nodded. "I know." When I got back to my Napa house that evening, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows over the vineyard. I made tea, mint this time, and sat down in my kitchen island, laptop open, the light from the screen illuminating a line of tiny notes I had started scribbling beside me. At 9:47 p.m., I sent Callista an email. It was brief. "I've reviewed the family trust proposal. Before I sign anything, we'll need to revisit the definition of consent, legal and otherwise." I didn't expect a response right away, but at 10:02 p.m., her reply came through. "Don't overthink this. It's all symbolic. We're family." I stared at the words. They sounded harmless enough, like a throwaway line from someone who didn't understand consequences. I typed back. "Symbols are legally binding when signatures are forged." Then I closed the laptop and turned off the light. The next morning, I didn't speak to anyone. I made breakfast, worked through emails, and met with a vineyard client who had questions about soil treatment. I wore a button-up shirt and jeans and looked like someone who spent her life tending grapes instead of quietly financing most of Northern California. Later that afternoon, Elgin and I had a short call. Nothing dramatic, just logistics. "We're submitting the first inquiry to the SEC," he said. Quiet routine. No accusations, just a request for document verification. "Good," I said. "Let's keep it small until it isn't." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't need to. They thought I was bluffing. They didn't realize I never play games I'm not prepared to win. The email had gone out days ago, and the silence that followed was heavier than I'd expected. Callista hadn't responded. Not a text, not a call, not even one of her veiled comments through our mother. Nothing. It was as though she'd chosen to pretend I didn't exist again. Fine. Let her have her illusion of control. That illusion was about to crumble. By the following weekend, an envelope arrived, thick, glossy, embossed with gold script. The Women of Legacy Gala, hosted by Callista Vexley. I didn't need to open it to understand the message. This was her counterattack. Her stage. The invitation was vague, celebrating visionary women who build the future. No mention of me, but I recognized the tagline. Word for word from a campaign proposal I had written 5 years ago for a female entrepreneur program. She'd recycled my work like she recycled affection. I stared at the invitation, wondering if I should ignore it. Elgin had advised caution. "You don't have to walk into every battle," he'd said. "But sometimes the smartest move isn't to avoid the fire. It's to step inside knowing exactly where the exits are." So, on the night of the gala, I dressed carefully. Black silk, no jewelry except a thin gold bracelet that had belonged to my father. My car pulled up to the Beverly Hills Event Center at 6:45. The valet took my keys with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes, already briefed, I imagined, to treat the sister of the host as a guest of obligation, not honor. Inside, the lights were dim, the room glowing with champagne gold and white orchids. The banners hanging from the ceiling announced the Callista Vexley Women's Fund. Each sign carried her face, smiling, powerful, philanthropic. If delusion had a font, I thought it would be in bold italics across every banner here. I took a glass of sparkling water and found a corner table near the back, half hidden behind a floral arrangement. People brushed by with careful smiles, unsure whether to greet me. A few offered that polite half-nod reserved for people they'd heard gossip about but didn't know how to approach. At 7 sharp, the MC took the stage. The applause was immediate, choreographed, enthusiastic. The introduction began with Callista's name, her vision, her selfless leadership. My sister appeared in a gown that shimmered under the lights, radiating confidence and calculation. The words washed over me. Founder, philanthropist, leader. Not a single mention of my contribution. Not my ideas. Not the fact that I'd been the silent funder of most of her early projects. When the big screen lit up for the promotional video, I felt my stomach twist, not in anger, but in recognition. The voiceover recited a line I had written myself years earlier for a press release that never got published. True empowerment is not about being seen, it's about creating space for others to stand beside you. She'd stolen that too, word for word. I didn't react, didn't frown, didn't sip my drink faster. I just sat there, watching the crowd rise to their feet as the screen faded and Callista walked on stage. They didn't erase me, I thought. They renamed me, like I never existed. She began her speech with all the charm she could muster. This fund, she said, her voice echoing through the hall, is a tribute to the women who raised me, taught me, believed in me, especially my family. I wondered for a brief second if she'd say my name. She didn't. Applause followed, and then laughter, then the sound of champagne glasses clinking. The night rolled on, loud and bright. When the program shifted to the Family Through the Years slideshow, I considered leaving. But something told me to stay. That slideshow, my mother's favorite tradition at these events, was supposed to be a symbol of unity. The first photo appeared, Callista as a child, grinning with frosting on her face. The next, her wedding day, surrounded by guests. And then, the one that should have been both of us. It was our childhood portrait. The one from our father's workshop, where he'd insisted we both wear the same blue dress. Except now, in this version, the photo had been cropped so tightly you could see only her shoulder and the faint edge of my hair. The audience clapped. Some people even said, "Ah." I just breathed in slowly. It's one thing to steal money, I thought. It's another to steal memory. That's a different kind of cruelty. When the slideshow ended, she returned to the stage to thank everyone. My name never crossed her lips. Not once. After the speeches, guests began mingling. The sound of laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and Callista floated from table to table, soaking in the admiration. I watched her from a distance, her smile too wide, her gestures too polished. I stepped outside for air, into the garden lit by soft amber lights. The night was warm, a faint breeze moving through the palms. I took out my phone and opened my email drafts. Subject: tonight. Attached was a document Elgin had helped me prepare, a transfer order pulling my entire $7.5 million pledge from the Vexley Fund. The message was simple: misuse of name, breach of donor trust. I hit send. When I walked back inside, nothing had changed yet. The orchestra played, the waiters served dessert, the crowd laughed. But beneath the glamour, the fault line had shifted. The floorboards had begun to creak. They built an empire on my silence. But I just pulled the floorboards loose. The moment I pressed send, I knew something had shifted. A single email, one quiet move, and the floor beneath that glittering room had started to give way. Inside the ballroom, no one felt it yet. They were still clinking glasses, laughing too loudly, admiring Callista's perfect poise under the chandeliers. They didn't see the crack forming in her empire, but I did. I could feel it. A few minutes after I returned from the garden, the MC called for everyone's attention. The champagne was topped off, the lights dimmed slightly, and the air hummed with expectation. Callista took the stage again, her confidence restored. "Before we end this extraordinary night," she said, her voice smooth as glass, "I have one last surprise for everyone." She gestured toward a waiter, who carried a framed document to the podium like it was some kind of holy artifact. "Tonight," she continued, "we are signing our official agreement to fund the next 10 years of women's leadership through the Callista Vexley Foundation." Applause thundered. People stood. Cameras flashed. She turned toward me, that same saccharine smile stretched across her face. "And I want to thank my sister, Claire Bennick, for inspiring me to dream big. You'll see her name right here as one of our top contributors." Isn't that incredible? The screen behind her flickered to life, showing the framed agreement. There it was, my company's logo, Bennick Holdings, printed boldly beneath her name, labeled executive donor. So that was her game. Use my name, my money, my influence, and stamp her title on top of it. For the cameras, it was a gesture of unity. For her, it was insurance, to make sure no one could ever separate what she'd built from what she'd stolen. I stood up, slowly, calmly. The MC looked uncertain. Callista's voice faltered, just for a beat, but she recovered. "Claire, would you like to say something?" I met her eyes and walked toward the stage. The crowd parted in awkward silence, their curiosity prickling the air. When I reached the podium, I smiled. "Would you mind," I said softly, "if I said a few words?" Her expression flickered, fear, then defiance. "Of course," she said tightly, stepping aside. I took the microphone, my hand steady. "It's always an honor to celebrate strong women," I began. "And tonight I see a room full of them. But strength isn't just about smiling for the cameras. It's about honesty, especially when no one's watching." A few polite laughs rippled through the audience, uncertain. Callista's smile wavered. "I'd like to share something personal," I continued, opening my clutch. A small reminder that legacies are only as strong as the truth they stand on. Before she could stop me, I plugged a small flash drive into the presentation laptop. The projector blinked once, and the video began to play. Callista's voice filled the room, crystal clear. "She's just a sad old woman with a fortune and no legacy," the recording played. "Let her pay for it. We'll take the credit." Gasps. Sharp, collective, like air being sucked out of the room. Someone dropped a glass. The clatter echoed. The audience froze, faces pale, hands halfway to their mouths. The quote repeated once before the screen went dark. I didn't move. I didn't need to. "This donation," I said finally, my voice level, "is now null. My legal team will be in contact. Have a beautiful evening." Then I handed the microphone back to the stunned MC and walked off stage. Behind me, chaos bloomed in whispers. Phones rose like a forest. Reporters fumbled for angles. Board members began to quietly separate themselves from the wreckage forming at the center of that elegant stage. Callista stood frozen. Her lips parted, but no words came. Robert Hawthorne tried to pull her aside, his hand gripping her arm, but she jerked away, her perfect composure cracking for the first time all night. I didn't turn back. I didn't need to see it to know what it looked like, the moment when a person realizes the empire they built was resting on sand. I made my way through the ballroom, the heels of my shoes tapping softly against the marble floor. No one stopped me. Some stared. A few moved out of the way. Others pretended to check their phones. I didn't scream, I thought. I didn't slap anyone. I just flipped the power back to where it belonged. Outside, the night air was cool, heavy with the scent of magnolia and wine. My driver saw me coming and opened the door. But before I got in, I took one last look at the glowing building behind me. Through the tall windows, I could still see flashes of light, hear fragments of confusion. The damage had begun. The unraveling would take time, but it was inevitable. As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed. A text from Elgin. "Everything go according to plan?" I smiled faintly and typed back, "Begin the audit." His reply came instantly. "Understood." I deleted the gala invitation from my phone. The entire evening vanished into the digital void with one swipe. The city passed outside my window. Dark hills, clusters of streetlights, the faint glow of late-night diners. I rolled the window down and let the wind hit my face, the first real breath I'd taken all night. For years, I had let my sister rewrite the story of who I was. The quiet one, the supporting act, the invisible investor. But not anymore. I leaned back in the seat, watching the reflection of the city lights flicker across the car glass. My pulse was steady, my thoughts clear. I wasn't just taking back my name. I was about to dismantle everything they built using it. 2 days had passed since the gala, though it felt like I'd lived an entire decade in that window of time. I had been quiet, strategically so, but not idle. While the media scrambled to make sense of the recording, while Callista dodged interviews and her publicist fired off no comments, I was moving pieces that couldn't be ignored. The morning sun cut through the smog as I stepped into Elgin's downtown office. I hadn't slept much, but I didn't need rest. I needed resolution. Elgin greeted me in the hallway. "I've got it," he said simply, leading me into his conference room. The room was neat, no nonsense. Papers were stacked with precision, digital files already queued up on his laptop. He gestured for me to sit. "This is the full audit," he began, clicking through tabs. "We trace the flow of capital from your shell companies to every structure Callista used, her fund, her husband's firm, even her personal PR agency." He pulled up a screen with color-coded arrows. 63% of her current wealth is either borrowed against or directly dependent on your holdings. I leaned forward. "What about the gala?" He nodded. "Covered. The venue is paid through a consulting firm registered under your corporate umbrella, disguised as Event Strategy Services. All her invoices trace back to that entity." I let out a quiet breath. "She didn't just borrow your name, Claire," Elgin added. "She built an identity with it. Her public image, her access to credit, even her social clout. It's all propped up by the assumption that you support her." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. The math was there, but I'd already known the answer. "They built a dynasty on my shadow," I said, my voice calm. "Time to bring it into the light." That afternoon, we filed the complaints. One with the Federal Trade Commission for fraudulent use of identity. Another with the IRS flagging inconsistencies in her nonprofit's filings. A third with the Office of the Inspector General. Elgin submitted the paperwork methodically. He'd been preparing for this moment longer than I had. While he handled the legal structure, I handled the narrative. From my office, I curated a secure video package. It included copies of the falsified contracts, a visual breakdown of how my shell accounts were used to prop up her foundation, screenshots of Callista's internal emails, including the now infamous quote, "Let her pay for it. We'll take the credit." The package went to exactly 17 recipients, board members, senior press contacts, 2 donors, and a senator who had once been quoted praising her visionary leadership. By evening, the responses began pouring in. The first headline came from a business journal. "Socialite sister stole millions from CEO sibling." Then came the blogs, the influencers, the think pieces. "This is why powerful women must protect their names." Claire Bennick breaks her silence with receipts. "When family steals the mic." I said nothing. Not a single interview. Not a press conference. I issued one statement, posted quietly on my company's social media account. "Visibility is power. Thank you for seeing me. CB." And that was it. Overnight, Callista's world cracked open. Her sponsors withdrew. Speaking engagements were postponed indefinitely. The Women of Legacy Fund was frozen under federal investigation. By Friday, her husband had filed for legal separation. A mutual acquaintance told me he moved into a hotel near Santa Monica, just until things cooled down. They wouldn't. And Callista, well, she finally went silent. I didn't feel triumphant. Not exactly. This wasn't about winning, it was about resetting the record. For years, she'd erased me with a smile and a microphone. I hadn't needed to shout. I just needed them to hear the truth. Late that night, I sat in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the headlines scroll across the bottom of a muted television screen. She took my name off the pictures, I thought. I took her name off the papers. The house was quiet. The vineyard outside stood still in the moonlight. I hadn't felt peace in a long time, not real peace, but this came close. Still, even as I sipped my tea, I knew the story wasn't over. Not all damage is public. Some wounds stay quiet, and I still had one left to tend. The mornings in Napa had changed. Not the light or the vines. They still rolled gently over the hills, soaking up the sun like they always had. But something inside me had shifted. A stillness, yes, but not the kind that used to come from hiding. This quiet was mine. I had earned it. 1 month had passed since the fallout. The headlines had cooled, replaced by newer scandals, shinier distractions. But the damage had been done, and this time, it wasn't mine to carry. I sat on the porch with a cup of black tea, no sugar, watching the dew evaporate off the leaves. No phone calls. No meetings. No reporters trying to parse statements I hadn't made. Just wind and birdsong and a silence that didn't demand an apology. The grapevines were budding again, preparing for the next season. It reminded me that life goes on whether you're ready or not. Across town, Callista was adjusting to her new reality. Her nonprofit had been dissolved, her public speaking contracts quietly canceled. She wasn't in handcuffs, but she didn't need to be. In her world, irrelevance was a deeper sentence. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had moved into a 2-bedroom condo off Mulholland. No staff. No social calendar. No photographer waiting outside her Pilates class. Just her and the weight of a reputation no longer upheld by other people's silence. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel joy either. What I felt was alignment. This wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The world had simply shifted back into balance. And in that space, cleared of her shadow, I built something new. The Bennick Fund launched quietly.
No ribbon cuttings. No speeches.
Just a clear mission and a clean website. We offered scholarships to young women pursuing engineering, especially those who had been told, directly or indirectly, that they were not enough. A few weeks after our launch, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address. It was from our first recipient. Her name was Amina, a freshman at Cal Poly, majoring in mechanical engineering. I was told I'd never be enough, she wrote. Thank you for proving them wrong and letting me prove it too. I sat at my desk, the letter open in my lap, the ink slightly smudged near her signature. I didn't cry. Not fully. But my eyes burned in a way that had nothing to do with sorrow. This was the legacy I was always meant to leave. Later that week, I drove to a small cemetery just outside of town. My father's headstone sat beneath a modest oak tree, the engraving simple, Thomas Bennick, 1946 to 2020. Builder.
Father.
Quiet light. I knelt and placed a stone on the top of the marker, a family tradition. 1 stone for each visit, each moment of remembrance. I did it, Dad, I said quietly. They saw me.
Not all of them.
But enough. The wind rustled through the branches. I sat there for a while, not thinking, not planning, just being. There's a wound that betrayal leaves. It doesn't always bleed, but it scars. And some days, when you move a certain way, you still feel the ache. I did. What Callista took from me was real.
Time.
Credit.
Trust.
A place in my own story. But what I'd built since, that was mine. Not borrowed, not stolen, not whispered about behind closed doors.
Mine.
On the drive back, the sun dipped low, casting golden streaks across the dashboard. I passed through vineyards and pastures, small towns and gas stations, all of them familiar in their stillness. When I arrived home, I made dinner, something simple, roasted vegetables and barley with lemon. I ate on the porch, barefoot, watching the sky go from amber to violet. There were no cameras,
No speeches.
no one to perform for. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting. Not for acknowledgement. Not for love. Not even for forgiveness. I'm not the old woman nobody wanted. I'm the woman who stopped waiting to be invited and built her own house instead. Sometimes, the loudest revenge isn't rage, it's quiet dignity, matched with undeniable truth. Claire didn't fight fire with fire. She didn't shout, threaten, or beg. She simply let the facts speak, and when the world finally saw her, it couldn't look away. What about you? Have you ever been treated like the invisible one until you had no choice but to remind them who you are? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story moved you, subscribe to our